Have you ever been touched in a way that didn't just stir your body, but healed something your soul forgot it was still holding? This isn't just a story, it's an awakening, a forbidden, beautiful surrender between two hearts separated by time, yet drawn together by something deeper than logic. He was only 22, she was 55, divorced, guarded, and buried under years of silence. But when his hands met her skin, they didn't ask for permission. They listened. This isn't about lust. This is about being seen again. Held again, wanted again. Every kiss became a prayer, every night a redemption, and in that quiet surrender, something broken was finally made whole. If you've ever felt forgotten, invisible, or too late for love, stay, this story is for you. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because sometimes love doesn't arrive when it should. It arrives when your soul is finally ready to be found. The first time his eyes met mine, it was like the air in the room forgot how to move. There was no hesitation in the way he looked, no apology, no curiosity laced with pity, no awkward glance that darted away like most do when they sense years between two people. He simply looked, long enough that the space between us turned soft and electric. Something in me stirred, something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the kind of gaze that young men usually give. It wasn't loud or showy or performative. It was quiet, sure, and steady. The kind of look that doesn't ask questions because it already knows the answers. His eyes didn't skim the surface. They sank in, as if they could see what time had tried to bury beneath layers of responsibility and routine and silence. The years don't erase a woman's hunger. They just teach it how to hide. Politeness becomes armor. Practicality becomes a prison. And slowly, gently, the body forgets the rhythm of wanting, not because it no longer desires, but because no one dares to awaken it, but he did. Not with words, not with flattery, just presence, that rare, dangerous kind of presence that doesn't see years, just truth. And the truth was, desire was still alive, not reckless, not desperate, alive. A slow burn, not a wildfire. It had learned patience over the years. It had learned to breathe quietly beneath a skin that the world no longer called beautiful out loud. The first time his fingers brushed against my arm, something in my chest lit up like it had been waiting for this. Exactly this, for far too long. The touch wasn't meant to lead anywhere, not yet. It was accidental. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was intentional in the way some things are when they're written into the universe before either person fully understands why. It was then I realized desire doesn't belong to the young. It belongs to the living, and I was still living. He had this way of making silence feel safe. We could sit without saying a word, and yet something inside me would unravel slowly, piece by piece, as if the quiet between us had hands of its own, gently removing the years I had layered over my skin like armor. There was nothing performative in him, nothing loud or rushed or demanding, only the slow, certain rhythm of someone who knew how to notice, truly notice. The first night we stood too close was unspoken. The moonlight fell across the floor, and his breath brushed my cheek as he leaned in, not even touching yet, just existing close enough to wake everything I had taught myself to numb. He didn't move quickly. He didn't try to seduce. He waited, patient like time itself, allowing me to feel every second of closeness until it felt unbearable to stay apart. I remember the moment his lips finally found mine, not because it was explosive, but because it was quiet. Reverent, the kind of kiss that doesn't ignite a fire, but remembers one that's been there, burning softly beneath the ashes. His kiss wasn't asking, it was remembering what it felt like to be wanted, not for usefulness, not for familiarity, but for being. The body remembered. Every inch of skin, every breath, every curve softened beneath the weight of that kiss, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. His hands didn't fumble or hesitate. They explored like they were discovering a map etched by time, one he was grateful to learn by touch. He didn't rush, he didn't conquer, he honored. As if he knew this body had carried too many burdens and needed to be reminded it was still soft beneath the scars. Desire wasn't something to be ashamed of, not with him. It wasn't loud or frantic. It was slow and grounding. Every glance, every brush of skin, every whispered breath in the dark was a reminder that this wasn't about lust. It was about presence. He saw what most never did, the woman still breathing beneath the mother, beneath the caretaker, beneath the years of being set aside. And when his body pressed against mine, it wasn't about youth or age. It was about warmth, connection, the raw, wordless kind that tells the truth better than any confession. He moved with intention, not eagerness. He didn't chase release, he created it, one slow, honest movement at a time. We fit, not in the way two bodies align, but in the way two needs recognize each other. He needed to give, not take. I needed to be known, not explained. And somewhere in between soft gasps and quiet moans, something deeper awakened, a longing that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with being truly seen. In the stillness after, when breath met breath and our skin stayed close, the silence between us wasn't empty, it was full. Full of things we didn't say but felt, full of understanding. He traced circles on my shoulder like he was thanking it for holding me up all those years, and I let him, because I no longer felt the need to pretend I wasn't aching. I no longer felt invisible, not with him. The world may have tried to define what this was, what it should or shouldn't be, but in that space, in that bed, in those arms, I belonged, not because he made me younger, but because he reminded me I had never stopped being alive, and that was enough. It didn't begin with a kiss or a whisper or even the look in his eyes. It began with the way he reached out, not to take, but to feel, not to possess, but to understand. His fingers brushed the side of my hand like he was listening through the skin, as if every inch of touch was a question without words, and somehow he already knew the answers I'd spent years too afraid to say aloud. Most people touch to get somewhere. They reach, they rush, they press too hard or too fast, but not him. He lingered, he explored without pushing, he felt with intention. There was no hunger in his hands, not the kind that devours anyway. His was the kind that restores. He didn't seek permission with words. He earned it with patience. His hands held silence, and in that silence, something inside began to soften. There were walls, carefully built, held up by years of being seen as something useful, never fragile. They weren't there to keep love out. They were there to protect what had already been cracked too many times. They had grown higher with every moment of being overlooked, every night of turning away from cold space beside me, every morning pretending that needing softness made me weak. But his touch didn't crash into those walls. It stood before them quietly, like someone lighting a candle at the edge of something sacred. The first time he touched my back, the base of my neck, just under my hairline, I felt something shift. It wasn't erotic. It was reverent. It was like being prayed over. His fingers weren't asking me to give, just to receive. That was the part I didn't know how to do anymore. Receive, to let go, to stop guarding every part of myself that had been called too much, too old, too late. But with him the need to guard slowly dissolved. Every caress said, I see you, not who you were or who you should be. I see you now. He didn't reach for what I looked like. He reached for what I felt like. He held my wrist like it was something valuable, not fragile. He touched my waist like it was familiar, not foreign. He laid his hand on my thigh not to move upward, but to rest there, steady and still, like his presence was enough. He didn't try to make me feel beautiful. He made me feel known. There's a difference. Beauty fades under comparison and time and the mirror's cruel silence. But being known, truly known, that stays, that sinks into the bones. That doesn't need makeup or lighting or the right words. And when he moved over me, it was with that kind of knowing, as if he already understood the language of my pain without needing me to speak it. There were places he touched that hadn't been touched in years, not out of neglect, but out of fear. He found those places not like a man on a mission, but like someone searching for what had been lost and wanted only to return it. He held the backs of my knees like they mattered. He ran his palm down my arm like it had story written across it. He kissed the inside of my wrist like he was remembering something, even though we had only just begun. And when he finally lay against me, chest to chest, warmth meeting warmth, I didn't feel small or aged or unsure. I felt safe, safe in a way that had nothing to do with locks or doors or words, safe in the way a soul feels when it's no longer hiding. He wasn't speaking, but everything in his body said, "You're allowed to feel again. You're allowed to need again." That's what undid me, not the way he touched, the way he stayed, the way he didn't try to fix or solve or seduce. Just stayed. There's something healing about a presence that doesn't flinch when it finds the broken pieces, something deeply erotic about gentleness, something rare and unforgettable about a man who chooses to listen with his hands and let silence carry all the meaning. The walls didn't fall because of lust or longing. They melted because of trust, and trust, for me, was the one thing I thought I had lost the ability to give, but he didn't ask for it. He made space for it. He let it arrive slowly, like a tide wrapping around both of us as we moved together, not with urgency, but with quiet devotion. He never told me I was safe. He made me feel safe, and in that space, intimacy became more than skin. It became language, it became confession, it became home, and when he held me after, no words spoken, just skin against skin and breath slowing in rhythm, I knew this wasn't something I would need to question or regret or explain. This was the kind of touch that rewrites everything, not because it changes who you are, but because it reminds you of who you've always been beneath all the forgetting. Somewhere between his hands and my surrender, I remembered. The first night wasn't planned. It wasn't scripted or lit with candlelight or dressed in soft music. It was quiet, hesitant, and honest. There was no grand moment of seduction, no rehearsed lines, just two people breathing in the same space, both carrying silence like a second skin. And when the lights dimmed and the night folded in around us, it wasn't desire that moved first. It was the ache of being noticed. His touch didn't start with hunger. It started with stillness, his hand resting lightly on the side of my neck, the pad of his thumb brushing just below my jaw. That simple gesture unraveled something in me I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Years of silence, years of going to bed untouched, unseen, years of pulling the covers over my body not to feel warmth, but to protect it from the sting of emptiness. But he didn't just touch skin. He reached something deeper. He didn't rush. His lips found mine slowly, tasting rather than taking, and as his hands wandered, they did so with a kind of reverence, as if he knew every inch of my body carried memories no one else had been willing to learn. He kissed my shoulder like he was apologizing for all the years no one had. He touched the curve of my back like it was a secret he was grateful to keep. There was no demand in his body, only offering. That first night, something broke inside me in the gentlest way. It wasn't loud or tearful, just a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding finally let go. It felt like coming home to a version of myself I thought had been left behind long ago. The one who used to believe in closeness, in touch, in being cherished. She hadn't died. She had just gone quiet, and he, without knowing, had called her back. Each time we met after that, it wasn't just a meeting of flesh. It was a quiet ceremony, a gathering of everything unspoken. In the dark, beneath the sheets, we didn't just make love. We made space for every hurt, for every longing, for every part of me that had been silenced under the weight of duty, age, shame, and forgotten want. He never needed the lights on, not because he wanted to hide, but because he knew that sometimes healing begins in the dark. Sometimes the safest place to be undone is where the eyes don't have to explain what the heart already understands. And in that darkness, his hands became the language my body hadn't heard in years. Slow, deliberate, never assuming. He mapped me like someone tracing the edge of a prayer, soft, sacred, unhurried. There were nights when we barely spoke, just laid there, tangled in breath and warmth, letting our bodies speak what our mouths couldn't. His chest against my back, his arm draped over my waist, the steady rise and fall of his breath anchoring me in a moment where nothing was expected and everything was given. He never asked me to be anyone but who I was right then, unpolished, unguarded, soft in all the places life had tried to harden. And I didn't ask him to be older or more experienced or less bold. I just let him be, and in return, I was allowed to be too. Every kiss was like a bandage pulled gently from a wound that had finally healed underneath. Every sigh between us was a thread weaving something whole again. He didn't worship me. He didn't idolize me. He respected me. That's what made every touch feel like redemption, not flattery, not fantasy, but presence, real, grounded, quiet presence. There was one night I remember more than the rest. A storm had rolled in, rain tapping against the windows while we lay beneath the covers. He ran his fingers down my arm, over my ribs, to the dip of my waist, not to arouse, but to remind. I had not vanished, I had not faded. I was still here, and he felt it, all of me, not just the body, but the story written into it. In that bed, I didn't have to hide the lines time had etched across my skin. I didn't need to tuck in my stomach or smooth out my flaws. He kissed every part like it belonged, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. There was no performance, just truth, just the quiet, steady rhythm of two people meeting each other exactly where they were. And when he held me afterward, when the room was quiet again and the rain had softened into silence, I realized something. This wasn't about being loved back to life. It was about being allowed to be fully alive without apology. Not every night was perfect. Not every touch was a revelation, but each moment was real, and in a world that had taught me to shrink, to fade, to become smaller with every passing year, that kind of real was everything. He didn't just love my body, he redeemed it, one night at a time. It wasn't supposed to happen, not like this, not with him. The difference in years alone should have made me pause, should have kept things in their proper place, cordial, distant, appropriate. But the heart doesn't work within margins, and love, the kind that doesn't follow rules, doesn't arrive with an announcement. It waits, patient, quiet, watching for the exact moment when every wall begins to crack. There was no logic to it, no reason to explain why someone so young could feel like something so needed. His voice wasn't deeper than the men I'd known, but it held weight. His eyes didn't carry age, but they held understanding. And his presence, it didn't rush or linger too long. It simply stayed. That alone unraveled me. I told myself he was just being kind, that it was harmless, that the way he looked at me was innocent, that the way I looked back was just curiosity. But something deeper began growing in the quiet moments, in the way he remembered things I never said twice, in the way he noticed when I was holding my breath, in the way he gave me silence that didn't feel empty. There was no effort in his presence. It didn't press, it allowed, and that in itself was dangerous. He didn't try to pull me toward him. He simply stood close enough that one night I stepped forward. Just a little, just enough for his hand to catch mine without either of us making it a thing. There was no conversation that followed, just warmth, just skin, just a steady thrum in the chest I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the kind of love that came wrapped in flowers or chased by flattery. It was slow, unfolding, like rain falling on dry earth. The kind of love that doesn't promise it proves. Each day, each glance, each unspoken connection. I didn't fall, I yielded, I didn't mean to. I had kept control for so long, held everything together with strong hands and quiet sacrifice. I thought that was love, maintaining, enduring, performing safety. But then he came and none of that was needed. I didn't have to perform, I didn't have to lead, I just had to let go, and letting go, that was the beginning. The first time we kissed, it wasn't romantic. Not in the movie sense. There were no stars, just breathe, just closeness, just the way his mouth found mine without asking, without rushing, like it had always belonged there. I didn't think, I didn't calculate. I simply allowed, and in that allowance I felt more alive than I had in a decade. His arms felt like contradiction, too new, too unearned, too young, and yet they felt like home. Like every piece of me that had been waiting for someone to hold without needing to be anything more than what I already was. The years between us didn't disappear. They just stopped mattering. When he touched me, time folded. I wasn't a number. I was a woman. I was breath. I was soul. We didn't need to define it. There was no map for this, no labels, just knowing. A quiet certainty in the way we moved together, the way he undressed me, not just of fabric, but of memory. Shame didn't live in his touch. There was no hesitation in his hands, no disbelief in his eyes. He touched me like I was still everything I had once believed myself to be, and I let him, not because I needed saving, not because I was broken, but because something in him made surrender feel safe. I could let down my guard, not as an act of desperation, but of truth, of trust. His hands didn't chase, they welcomed. His voice didn't command, it invited. His body didn't press, it received. Love with him was not a performance, it was a return. Every night we met, it felt less like sin and more like sanctuary. The world outside those walls didn't exist. There was only the space between his chest and mine, only the rhythm of his breath on my skin, only the quiet surrender of two people who had no idea how it happened, only that it had. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't dissect the past. We just breathed, touched, stayed. He never once made me feel like a mistake. That alone was a kind of miracle. I had lived too long being made to feel like time had made me less. But in his arms, there was no less. There was only enough, more than enough. Sometimes we laughed. Sometimes we didn't speak for hours. Sometimes we made love like the world was ending. And sometimes we just lay there, legs tangled, his hand resting over my heart like he was anchoring me to something I'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. It didn't make sense, but it didn't need to. Love had nothing to prove. It just had to be received, and I did, quietly, fully, without apology. Love doesn't always arrive wrapped in logic or tied to what the world says is right. Sometimes it slips in through silence, through steady hands, through the softest whisper in the dark. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that you are still worthy of being desired, known, and deeply loved, then don't let it be the last. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Here we tell the stories no one else dares to, the ones where age, time, and fear are no match for the truth of intimacy. You deserve stories that remind you you're not forgotten. You're just beginning.